just a big thanks from me to the APC and Philippa for inviting me today. It's great to be with you all virtually. I guess if nothing else, I must confess I can't quite work out if I really like being able to do these things from the comfort of my own home, or actually I really miss the sort of fresh coffee, pastries, informal catch-ups with friends and colleagues. But I guess this is the time in which we live. So if you could perhaps flick on to the next slide. Philippa was joking earlier how I'm going to be doing my best Chris Whitty impression, I think, kind of over the next 15 or 20 minutes. But yeah, my name's Richard Halsey. I'm director at the National Energy Systems Catapult, and I lead a team of planners, engineers, modelers, data and social scientists. I've got nearly 2 decades of experience working in clean tech, decarbonisation and innovation in the UK and internationally. I'm also a member of the BEIS Hydrogen Advisory Council, previously led the National Smart Systems and Heat Programme, and I'm responsible currently for the Catapult's management of the BEIS Electrification of Heat demonstration project, and also a really wide and varied number of innovation projects looking at the development of integration of hydrogen as part of net zero energy systems, both at a global, national and local scale. So hopefully kind of some relevant experience and expertise to the topic that we have today. Perhaps move on to the next slide. For those of you that aren't familiar with catapults, and particularly the Energy Systems Catapult, we are one of a network of innovation centres across the UK that's supported by Innovate UK to help accelerate innovation and open up new markets. Now, our specific focus at the Energy Systems Catapult is on the opportunities that arise from the transformation and decarbonisation of our energy system. And today, as Philippa kind of outlined, I'm going to give you a bit of a short perspective on hydrogen as part of the UK's net zero future, but in that global context. Now, one of the sort of really key values or beliefs of the Energy Systems Catapult is the need for us to take a much more holistic and whole systems approach to thinking about how we transform our energy system and ensuring that we realise the potential benefits that could be on offer. And if you move on to the next slide, this tries to kind of articulate a little bit better what actually does that mean, because I've certainly found over the last couple of years that the mantra of whole system has become quite commonplace, quite widely used and applied, but sometimes it's really important to think about, well, what actually do we mean by that? And well, at the Energy Systems Catapult, what we mean is that we mean thinking about how we better connect the uses of energy that we have to its production, transmission and distribution, how we break down the silos that have existed across different parts of the energy system, including really importantly between electricity, heat and transport, and how we join up the physical requirements for change with that's needed for policy and regulation. And also how we support the digitalisation of our energy future and ensure we realise the benefits of this, but also manage the potential risks. And if you move on to the next slide, delivering net zero means a vastly increased role for hydrogen in global energy systems. And that's something that's increasingly being recognised by economies worldwide. And Philippa kind of alluded to the wide range of projects that we're seeing start to happen globally in response to this. And the UK is no different. At the Catapult, we spend quite a lot of time thinking about what the transformation of the UK's energy system might mean, and the challenges and opportunities that this creates for government, businesses, and us as individuals. And we did some work at the end of last year using our whole energy system modelling environment titled Innovating to Net Zero. And this looked in some detail at what the shift to a net zero commitment from our previous 80% emission reduction target meant, and what that also meant for our future innovation priorities. And this found it was now very difficult for certain sectors to hide in that final 20% when we had an 80% emission reduction target. And I actually think maybe quite a lot of sectors were really hoping that they would be able to land in that final 20%, and therefore some of the really thorny, difficult challenges and issues might not really need to be engaged with, or would be a bit of a problem further down the line. And the big shift to net zero means that obviously that space to hide no longer exists. And what that means for hydrogen in terms of the UK's energy system is that it could grow to represent up to 300 terawatt hours of energy by 2050. Now, that's broadly equivalent to the size of our power sector today. So that is a radical scale up and change in less than 30 years. And quite often 30 years can seem like a really long time. But when you're talking about large scale deployment of infrastructure, actually decades can be nowhere near enough in some cases. If you move on to the next slide, but what we think, I think really makes that challenging is that hydrogen isn't alone in undergoing transformation at an unprecedented scale and pace. It is one of 3 energy vectors, along with electricity and potentially district heating, that will need these step changes from where they are today if we are to get the UK to net zero by 2050. Also, we can't forget that the digitalization of energy, as with many other aspects of our lives, particularly post-COVID, and the increasing interconnectivity across different energy vectors, means that this relationship will have a huge amount of increased complexity, but also dependency between it. If you move on to the next slide, there are many different ways in which global energy systems and that of the UK could be configured, and the role that hydrogen might play in these new net zero systems. This is in terms of how hydrogen is produced, how it is stored and distributed, and how it is used. And parallels are often drawn with the scale up of technologies such as offshore wind. But the challenge we have with hydrogen is that we have to get the development of both production and end use applications to progress in parallel. And we need to plan effectively for how we are going to get hydrogen from where it is generated to where it is consumed. And the uncertainty that surrounds the potential production routes and application makes this a real challenge. And it means that we're going to need a much more holistic and coordinated approach to navigating the integration of hydrogen as part of a more sophisticated, coordinated, digitally enabled energy system. If you move on to the next slide, our analysis considered many different system configurations for net zero. And these are just 2 net zero scenarios for hydrogen production. I don't like to get too sort of caught up in sort of the specifics sometimes of scenarios, and but what they can do is give you kind of an understanding of the certainty or uncertainty, the areas of opportunity, and the approach that needs to be taken to effectively transition. And what we found from this was that there's lots of uncertainty in the most cost-effective methods for production of hydrogen. And what this really does is reinforce the important need and value of a twin track approach in supporting both blue and green hydrogen production, at least in the near term. Well, this is 2 scenarios. Actually, a lot of work was done across many, many scenarios, and the variation in how hydrogen was produced was quite significant. So it really does enforce that this need for a options-based approach, particularly over the coming years. If you move on to the next slide, what we also found, which is interesting with regard to the application of hydrogen, is that there was lesser uncertainty around the important role of hydrogen, particularly in the decarbonisation of industry, but also aspects of transport, and greater uncertainty for the role of hydrogen for heat in UK homes and buildings, but potentially no less important. And it also must be recognised that there are many other different factors that have to be considered beyond just balancing supply and demand and the cost effectiveness of our future energy system. These include very practical things around disruption, safety, but also consumer acceptance and appeal, What are the things that we as consumers are going to support, want, and pull in terms of products and services? If you move on to the next slide, as Philippa kind of alluded, and I think as I said a little bit earlier, global economies, including the likes of Germany, France, South Korea, and many others, are increasing their commitments and investments to accelerating the production and application of low carbon hydrogen. And let's not forget that today China produces around, I think, about 1/3 of global hydrogen, but obviously not low carbon. And that is the important fact. We need to scale up the production of hydrogen, and we need to ensure that that hydrogen is low carbon. If it's not, then the support for the scaling of hydrogen is ultimately not going to support our climate change and net zero commitments and ambitions. Now, it's great that the UK now has a 10-point plan. We've got an energy white paper which sets a commitment to 5 gigawatts of low carbon hydrogen production capacity by 2030. We've got a 240 million net zero hydrogen fund. There is a national hydrogen strategy on the horizon, hopefully by the summer. I think we perhaps thought we might be talking about today, but it's not quite there yet. And I'm really hoping that that's also going to be supported by a world-leading hydrogen innovation roadmap, or the commitment to that roadmap. I have to be honest, I'm not really sure if hydrogen is really a global race of some sort, perhaps more a global challenge to be tackled together. But if it is a race, I think it's fair to say that the UK has perhaps at least now got its running shoes on. If you go on to the next slide, the reality is, which again I think Philip alluded to, there's actually quite a lot of things happening and starting to happen across the UK. From important early stage research to large scale innovation and demonstration projects. We've got the HyNet project in the Northwest looking to produce blue hydrogen and demonstrate carbon capture and storage. We've got the Milford Haven Energy Kingdom project, which is designing and aiming to demonstrate the practical application of green hydrogen in both transport and smart hybrid heating systems. Up in the Orkney, where they're using a combination of tidal and wind energy to generate and store green hydrogen. And we've now got the UK's first ever hydrogen transport hub being built in Tees Valley to provide us a focal point for research, testing and innovation trials across multiple transport modes. It's far from a barren landscape of inactivity. However, one of the real challenges potentially we're going to have is with the parallel running of so many of these research projects, trials, demonstrations. How are we going to ensure that we're able to share knowledge, share intelligence, learn from these projects as they progress? We run the risk of many projects seeking to learn and understand and them not being able to finish and understand before we're moving on or progressing other things. The time that we have for net zero creates a real challenge in that regard. And it requires us to ensure that there is a connectivity between the activity and the ability and a focal point for the collection and sharing of our intelligence, our research and our innovation. And in reality, we are not alone in this respect. Whilst the UK has a lot going on, other countries globally are ramping up their R&D innovation activity, be that from the States, Korea, Germany, France. So the UK has to keep both pace, but it also has to be cognizant of and connecting with the global innovation and ensuring that it is learning lessons, it is sharing knowledge and information globally. So if you move on to the next slide. So what might this all mean going forward? It seems pretty clear that we need this twin track approach to the production of hydrogen, at least in the near term. But blue hydrogen is really going to need carbon capture and storage to be consistent with our net zero emissions targets and goals. And we're going to need innovation to ensure really high carbon capture rates can be achieved. Without that, we're not going to deliver on our net zero commitments. Green hydrogen can deliver lower carbon hydrogen production, but it's going to need industrial scale demonstration and cost reduction. How we distribute hydrogen effectively will be dependent on production volumes and end use. So we're going to need to think really hard about how we plan our infrastructure globally, nationally, and locally in a way that can progress and handle the uncertainty, but give us the infrastructure that we need to deliver net zero outcomes. I really think about hydrogen as a really big, perhaps the biggest in the context of global decarbonisation, systems integration challenge that we face on the road to zero. Industry certainly looks like a low regret application and has the potential to help us de-risk many other future applications. There is also a potentially really important role for hydrogen in power generation in helping us balance supply and demand with much more renewable generation as part of integrated energy systems. Hydrogen for heating appears less certain and faces competition from other technologies with safety and economics important aspects to be tackled, and the UK is well placed to understand this and explore this. Hydrogen for transport has really high potential, but it has strong competition from other vectors. For both technology and business innovation is going to be really vitally important to ensure that we see the right application of hydrogen in the transport sector. And finally on this, we're going to need, in my view, a much more coherent economy-wide carbon policy framework. And this needs to ensure that we drive the production and application of hydrogen in a way that delivers the most value and benefit to the system, to businesses, and to us as consumers. And this now brings me to my final point, if you move on to the last slide, which is that if the UK is going to play its part in accelerating hydrogen, then we're going to need to build a much more connected innovation ecosystem across production, distribution, and use of hydrogen, and also across early stage research, which I think Laura's perhaps going to touch on a little bit later, through to early scale demonstration and industrial application. To support this, the Catapult network has come together to leverage its collective capabilities, facilities, and expertise, and working closely with other research and innovation organisations, including the APC, to develop the concept of a hydrogen innovation initiative, with the ambition that this could provide a clear focal point for supporting hydrogen innovation in the UK and ensuring that if we are in a race, then the UK is at the very least out of the blocks and is in the running. Thank you. I think I'll hand back to Philippa now.
Thanks, Richard. Really interesting things there. I've got a quick question or a bit of clarity, really. You put up a slide about the final energy consumption and how that's going to change out to 2050. But it seemed the total amount of energy being used was going down. Why? How? I suppose.
I think this is a kind of combination of initiatives around behaviour change and energy efficiency and digitalisation of the energy system. Obviously, with scenarios around future energy use and future energy application, it is based on assumptions, but it's assuming a series of efficiency gains are achieved, particularly around the ability to control energy, which I think we see as one of the potential real advantages of digitalization and enabling control. We start to see a more effective management and storage of energy, which means that we ultimately just become more efficient in its use.
Okay, great. Thanks.
One for debate, though, Philippa, I would always say we have no end of debates outside about do we consume more or do we actually start to control. One of the other really interesting things I'd say, I think, is we've been starting to think about what COVID and what is COVID telling us about how our future energy use might evolve and change. What will that mean for some of the assumptions that have been made historically? Might we see a greater, more rapid shift in some aspects of how we use energy?
Yeah, definitely be interested in the sort of the interrogation of that analytics in terms of, you know, what the last year has shown us, really, both from a national perspective and other countries as well.
Yeah, definitely. And certainly from an emissions perspective, obviously COVID has been, you could argue an incredible thing in terms of global emissions reduction. I'm not sure we would accept that trade-off as a society, really, would we? But we maybe do have the opportunity to think about what are the opportunities for emission reduction from the way we change what we do and how we do it.
Yeah, definitely. Right, I've got a live question, so I'm hoping that we can go to Neil Wilson.
The increased use of hydrogen, which everyone's advocating, and it does sound very sensible, that'll have a big demand on a bigger demand on the national power requirements, the energy requirements. So my question really is, has this been recognised by the government, and are they putting some commitment in place to build more power plants, more power generation units, to take on the additional demand should hydrogen become the fuel of the future?
I mean, a really good question. Yeah, I think sort of as I alluded to earlier, I think the need for kind of this integrated approach to thinking about power, electricity production and application and hydrogen in kind of parallel and tandem is really, really important. I think government recognises that, and the fact that these things can't be seen in isolation. I think there is a growing recognition of the need for this kind of more holistic perspective, and that you consider these things in the round. Practically, it is obviously a very hard thing to do. I've got a team of systems engineers sit and they try and figure out how do some of these things actually connect and relate to each other, and how do you make sure that when you squeeze one bit of the system, something else in the system kind of can manage that and understand that. So I think there's kind of more to be done. And I think there's probably more to be done both on the kind of physical aspect of how we design the future energy systems, but also a hell of a lot to be done on the policy and regulatory environment that we create to enable that to happen. If we create the right conditions, in my view, then those things can stand the chance of being successful. But it's not going to be easy. I think, as I said at the start, we certainly foresee the significant growth of the kind of electricity sector to get us to net zero, and doing that in parallel with the growth of hydrogen is one of the big challenges. And this dependency, as where we're maybe producing hydrogen to then go back into production of electricity, or we're taking electricity and we're using that to produce hydrogen because we're using hydrogen as a storage mechanism, is a real complex, knotty challenge. So it's not easy. But I think it is recognised as a need and a challenge by government, in my view, anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I guess the follow-on question from that is: do you see nuclear power being a way to fill that gap?
I certainly think from our analysis, we see that there is a potential role for nuclear in the production of both heat and hydrogen. It is an interesting prospect. The role of nuclear, and certainly the form of nuclear as well, with talk about advanced nuclear and SMRs, etc. There certainly is something important to be looked at, I think it's fair to say, particularly on the cogeneration side. There's a kind of interesting concept of being able to use nuclear to cogenerate both district heating and the production of hydrogen, to be able to effectively switch between the two, which could be a valuable thing within a net zero future. Recognising also that obviously the debates and perspectives on nuclear in the round as well.
Thanks, Neil. There's another question from Paul Gallen. Paul's had to drop off, unfortunately, to another meeting, but he was asking, are there going to be any incentivized programs of support to firmly root manufactured systems for the hydrogen revolution in the UK? Examples such as household boilers, fuel cells, hydrogen tanks, pipelines, valves, etc. Just if you've got any insight on that, Richard.
I think it's one where I'm not sure I've probably got too much insight, but I certainly know there's a lot of people looking at it. Sort of with the colleagues at the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, our catapult's involved in a concept for a national centre for decarbonising heat, of which the potential for manufacturing around different aspects of decarbonising heat, including things like hydrogen boilers, is a kind of an important component part. So I certainly think there is opportunity, and there's a bunch of activity looking at that. I think, again, if we are going to root that in the UK, it does require quite a strong commitment and a strong investment to create the signals and to create the conditions for that to happen. So I think we're going to have to see how the government decides to kind of support that and bring that forward. I think the final thing I'd say is I do think it's quite important in terms of that creating a quite cross-cutting, given the uncertainty in terms of application. We need to have quite a lot of activity across a range of potential applications and different forms of production to stand the greatest chance of success. And we also need to, I think, seek to exploit the UK's kind of knowledge and people capability to some extent. We are, we've got an incredibly kind of expert, a group of businesses and individuals that know how to make things work, how to handle gas, how to manage gas, how to operate gas systems, which I think is potentially valuable globally. So we need to be making sure that we're also leveraging, exploiting that.
Lovely. And I don't know, Barvik, are you there from the APCSE? He's popped a question. I'll put him on the spot now to see if we can get him to ask it live.
Thank you, Philippa.
Thank you.
Hi, wonderful. Richard, thanks for all this. So, as you know, at the APC, we're loving this this topic because it's very rich. It's important, as you know, not for transport, but for UK energy as a point. Maybe I wanted to bring up a topic which is quite fresh and interesting for us. It's our self-sufficiency in generating green hydrogen, electrolysis scale up, versus importing it. Now, what's really interesting about this green hydrogen aspect is when we take the solar and the wind from places that are better than the UK, and say, for instance, Chile, they can get it to us at sensible cost curves from the McKinsey work that's been done by the Hydrogen Council as well. So how do you see the mix of import versus export that maybe and this is a crystal ball gazing question, Richard, I get it, and I thank you for already your quite well crafted your caveats there. So what's your thoughts, Richard?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's probably one of the most interesting kind of debate points as much as anything, and it's probably as much about what do we see as a good energy future for the UK in terms of kind of global connectivity and also dependency. And some of it will be about do we want to create conditions by which we're importing, and that we create the effective and efficient and an ability to import effectively kind of a global commodity, very much, I suppose, as we do today. And to what extent do we want to try and create the conditions for greater kind of energy independence? And I personally think there's kind of pluses and minuses on kind of both sides of the fence. And I have to be honest, in my view, I'm not quite sure. I have a sort of very personal, sort of deep-rooted kind of potential leaning towards kind of energy independence. But that's probably less of a catapult's position and more of a personal position. But I think it's a really important one as we think over the next 5 years about how that might evolve. And I think it comes back to it really, really important to build those kind of international kind of collaborations and understanding how things are happening. I do have some concerns that actually we build high volume hydrogen production, but actually it isn't net zero hydrogen. We're only doing this because we need to decarbonize.
Yeah.
If the hydrogen that we produce is not zero carbon, it's not really achieving the objective that we're looking to achieve. So that's a really important aspect. I do think in the UK we have the potential ourselves as well for obviously hydrogen export. In certain contexts, if we're able to grow and catalyze green hydrogen production in the UK, it could be potentially something that we're a very powerful player in. So I think there's opportunity and challenge, but huge amounts of uncertainty, and a good one for debate going forward that I'm really keen to engaging with people on.